Hi, everybody, and welcome to the first of two nights of final presentations by this year's applicants for CPC funding, which will be applicable fiscal year 2021. I'd like to, at this time, thank all of the townspeople for their deciding so many years ago to vote to opt in on a CPC tax surcharge so that we could help fund worthy projects that otherwise may have fallen by the wayside. That's to everybody in the room and everybody at home as well. I need to make an announcement tonight that changes something on the agenda. The Executive Director of the Community Preservation Coalition, which is the body that is all things CPC procedurally and information-wise for all the municipalities in Massachusetts that opt into CPC, has said that the Benjamin Lincoln statue is ineligible for CPC funding. The problem is that the project was submitted as a recreation project, but to be eligible for CPC money, a recreation project has to be on dedicated parkland. That's a legal designation, and the spot chosen for the statue does not fit that definition. For my committee and for my liaison from the advisory committee, I have a communication in your packet tonight from the Executive Director of the Community Preservation Coalition explaining why why his office feels the project is ineligible. With that, I think we have no choice but to decide to move ahead without considering that project. The Executive Director told me that if CPC voted to recommend money for that project and the town then voted to accept the project, we could be in hot water with the state, that we would be in hot water with the state and could very well lose our CPC match from the state. I'm sorry this came at such a late date of notice. We didn't learn till the middle of last month that the project was allowed to continue to be considered. We had to get that word from the selectmen, and they said that on December 17th, and I contacted the Community Preservation Coalition office right after Christmas, but they were closed till Monday, and they called me Tuesday morning and gave me that information, which I was surprised because I was really calling to see could the statue be recreation, and he said, first let's talk about the land, and then all of that came out. But before we move to the projects that are going to get discussed tonight, I would like to entertain up to, but no more than 15 minutes of comments and questions from anybody on my committee and anybody on the floor as relates to the eligibility issue of that project. Not the value of the project or the worth of the project, but if you have any information that could contribute to what we've learned since yesterday, that would be useful. After that 15 minutes are up, I'll ask if there are any other announcements that need to be made. And after that, we'll move on to the presentation of the projects that have been deemed eligible for CPC funding. So I'm going to go with my committee first.
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry. I do know that Mr. Ramsey is going to be here. So I don't know if you want to put this later, this discussion. But he's planning on being here.
Okay. It's great that he's planning on being here. I communicated to him in an email yesterday that I was going to make an announcement at the beginning of the meeting saying just this. So I think this would be the time to talk about it because we're then going to move on to the presentation that was expected, which was of the other projects.
Can I make a comment about that?
Yeah. Can you just bring the mic a little?
Yeah. I saw your email yesterday, and I saw Bill's response to your email. My concern is that Mr. Saganor himself says he doesn't issue legal opinions, and my concern also is that you are one member of this committee, not every member of this committee, and we put an agenda on public notice that we would be discussing the Benjamin Lincoln statue third on the agenda tonight. So I object to kind of a unilateral day before the meeting change of the agenda based on one person's admittedly not a legal opinion and taking it out of the committee's consideration. So I would submit to you that we should proceed not with 15 minutes now, but when we get to the Benjamin Lincoln statue, if it's appropriate to have that conversation then, I think he should have the presentation, but I don't think we should talk about it out of order. This is our agenda, and I would propose that we stick with our agenda.
Any other comments from the committee?
I agree with Judy on that. And I understand what Stuart said, and I most likely may agree with him later on, but I think we should just proceed according to the agenda and let the applicant, have a chance to address that issue.
Okay.
From a coalition perspective, from what you know, does hearing them out tonight prejudice us or the town as it relates to the vote? Like, is it really the vote that we would otherwise take next week that relates to the prejudice that could come later?
I guess potentially, if we hear this out tonight as a regular project, we are taking the position that it's continues to be CPC eligible. I don't see how it could possibly be CPC eligible. It's true, it's not a legal opinion. I did speak to the town council last month about this project, not about the land part. I wasn't aware about the land part. I said it's become clear that the funding is solely for the statue, and is that allowed under recreation? And he said it's a judgment call, and that just sounded kind of not definitive to me. That's why I wanted more information. After I spoke to Stuart Saginaw yesterday, I have since tried twice to reach town council by phone and 3 times by email, and he just hasn't gotten back to me. And, he's busy and it's all very short notice. I don't know that we're going to get a legal opinion. We have a lot of authority as the CPC body to decide whether the project is eligible for CPC funding or not. The town council may say, based on the information you received, it's up to you guys. He may not get back to me. I just don't know. So it could prejudice next week's vote, because then it comes across that, oh yes, we're going forward even though we got all of this. It's considered legitimate, but I'm not sure.
Larry, can I ask a question? If we ask town council to give an opinion, is that something that the committee gets charged for his or her fees?
Yes.
I really would recommend we talk about this in the order that it's on the agenda, since the applicant expected us to talk about it in that order and isn't here to discuss it.
I have a question. Larry, I actually agree with Judy in that it's easy enough to address whether we have a legal opinion or not, because to move forward under CPC funding, it occurs that either they have already gotten the road right-of-way that can be converted to parkland, or they don't. And if they don't have that, then it's a matter of that is a legal definition. If they do not have that currently, then it wouldn't be eligible to receive the funding, correct?
Correct. There's two parcels actually that the statute would go on. One is a transportation right-of-way owned by the town, and one is the commercial building lot owned by Matt Falconeri. But okay, why don't we wait for Bill to come? And yes.
I agree with the other committee members that have said that we have an agenda. The agenda is publicly noticed. I think the appropriate thing to do is to allow the applicant to make the presentation that they expected to make. We are not prejudicing our ability to ultimately reject the application. The time to debate and decide whether it is eligible and gets accepted or rejected, gets $0 or lots of dollars, is when we make our vote. But to unilaterally decide tonight, we would be, I think, not only being unfair and in violating the agenda, but we would be violating the open meeting law, because we are taking a vote that we have not noticed on the agenda that we would be taking. Tonight is for presentations. Votes come in the following week. So I think we ought to hear the presentations, and then next week, when everybody's had a chance to digest it, Then we can decide, is this eligible? If it is eligible, do they get any money?
I agree with you up to a point. I'm fine with letting the presentation go on and having Bill address the eligibility aspect of his project. I don't think we should take a vote on whether to vote money the same night that we vote on whether it's a project that's eligible for CPC funding. I think that has to be done separately. And what I would suggest, and I would have to amend tomorrow night's agenda, is we have the discussion tonight about the statue project, and we discuss and take a vote on the eligibility tomorrow night. And you do, but I think, and Dave, maybe you can speak to this, is there a way to make an emergency amendment to an agenda, or no?
I don't have an opinion on that.
You don't have an opinion on that?
Why don't you want to just wait to vote? What's the urgency?
Because if we wait to vote, it's going to muddy, I think it's going to muddy the waters between eligibility and how much to vote for the project.
You could make that a separate first vote, because you have a week or 2 weeks to change that agenda, but I.
1 week.
Or 1 week to change that agenda. I'm very cautious about our sticking to the agendas that we posted.
Okay, so that's a good point. Why don't we do that? Why don't we have Bill present tonight, and then when I post the agenda for next week, I'll say that before we vote on any monies for anything, we will take a vote on the eligibility of that project for CPC funding. And depending on the outcome of that vote, we'll take that project from there.
Thank you.
Does that seem reasonable to the committee?
Yes.
Okay, great.
It seems to me that decision is part and parcel of the vote to give any money. I don't think you need to have it as a separate vote. When we're discussing all the projects and how we're going to vote, you don't have to make it a separate vote. You simply say, is this eligible? Is it not?
I disagree with that. In fact, we should be talking about eligibility right up front, as we were. I'm comfortable with making two separate votes. I think that's not unreasonable, and they're two separate issues. Anyway,
I would ask that we submit the question to town council to see whether town council can give us written guidance on this.
well, I have, and as I said, he hasn't gotten back to me yet, but it has only been 1 day, so maybe between this week and next week he will. Okay?
I would hope so.
Okay. So, are there any other announcements that people want to make not related to this project? Okay. Then I think we should move on to the final presentations. And just for everybody in the room and for everybody at home, I want to make clear that this year we have $1,693,000 to give out. $489,000 of that has to be reserved for debt service, $356,000 on the Lehner land, and $133,000 on the Historical Society's Heritage Museum. That leaves us with $1,204,000. From that, $169,300 at a minimum must go to the Hingham Affordable Housing Trust, because as part of the Community Preservation Act, 10% of what there is to give out at a minimum has to go to that silo. So out of that $1,203,999, some of that will automatically be going to affordable housing. It'll be up to the committee to decide if we want more than that to go to affordable housing. Okay? So with that, let's get started with the presentations. And first up is Lonnie Fournier for Lehner Conservation Area Improvements, and the request is for $21,754.
Hello, Happy New Year, everyone. I don't have a PowerPoint presentation to give you, but I do have a little bit of more new information to share. At the conclusion of the last meeting, I was asked to look at an alternative to a fence, which would be just posts instead of a post and rail. The example of Turkey Hill was brought up, Whitney Thayer Woods, where they have posts marking at least trails. I'm not sure that they mark property boundaries. I did do that research, so I just have some additional numbers to present to you. Not knowing the best distance to space the posts apart, I did some quick site review in my office and proposed 20 feet apart to the fence company and asked them to provide a quote for that distance. So it would be a fence post every 20 feet along the entire property boundary. Their feedback to me was that from experience, and they do not deal exclusively in just residential fences, they do public lands, conservation land as well. They felt as though 20 feet apart was too far apart, so they strongly recommended not to pursue that distance. For reference, if we were to insist on a spacing of 20 feet apart, the fence total would come down. So the original fence total is $18,432. Just post 20 feet apart would make that total $6,558. Alternatively, the fence company suggested a minimum of, or a maximum of 10 feet apart. And if we go with 10 feet apart, they would be unable to add rails in the future. So we would be spending money to put posts in that are 10 feet apart, and then those posts could not be altered to accommodate rails to make a full fence in the future. So posts at 10 feet apart, the total is $10,961. And then finally, if we were interested in having posts installed that could be made into a fence in the future for whatever reason, the posts would be spaced 8 feet apart, and the total would be $13,703.
Questions, comments? Judy, you're the liaison, right?
Are these presentations a matter of public record? Is the applicant being asked to give a full overview of the project, the need for it, and all of that? Or is tonight simply updates like Lonnie has just presented?
It could kind of be whatever the applicant chooses. It's fine to make
But what will our vote be based on, and is it important for the public to have kind of a sense of what the project is? Is tonight the I'm mostly asking the question for Lonnie's benefit. Is tonight also the applicant's opportunity to inform the town itself about what the project is?
Sure. Do you want to, again, give the background about why
Sure.
you're requesting this?
Yep. So I guess I would encourage everyone at home to reference the first series of presentations. I did not bring it with me tonight, but in there are some eye-opening photographs of what it's like to enter onto the Lehner property in the vicinity of number 72 South Pleasant Street, which is a private house. Right now, it is not clear where to enter or where to walk, whether you're coming from South Pleasant Street onto the property or whether you're coming from the trails that lead down from Jacobs Meadow into Lehner area. There are no set boundaries. There are no markers. There are no wooden stakes. It's not clear where it's acceptable to walk if you're visiting the Lehner property. Complicating that is that it's also not clear where maintenance of the private land should stop and start. So we're witnessing some encroachment onto the conservation land, minor encroachments, mowing, leaf blowing, that kind of thing. And so if I were to reach out to the private property owner, which I intend to do, and ask them to keep their maintenance activities on their land, it's frustrating. I would assume it's frustrating for them, but it's also frustrating for me in that there's no marker. There's no physical marker in the field to say, this is us and this is you, and we'll be good neighbors as long as, I keep our visitors on our side and you can maintain your lawn as you would like on your side. So it's challenging in that the best next step, if we don't do a fence or we don't pursue a fence, is to notify them that we would like those activities to stop, and yet it's not clear at all where the boundary is. There are no markers in place. So it is both an attempt to make it more visitor-friendly and give people steady guidance on where they can walk, allow people to enjoy the property, and also help with the maintenance activities both on the conservation side and on the private property side.
And what was the amount of money that was not about the boundary, but just about the kiosks? And
Right, so thank you for that. The property will have to be resurveyed in order to site the fence properly, and the estimate that I got for doing that work is $1,800. The kiosks, to have them ordered from the company that provided kiosks throughout town, so they would match the rest of the kiosks in town, that was $1,271. And then it would be an additional $250 or so to get DPW's help to install the kiosks on the property. So the full scope of the proposal is surveying for the fence, installing 2 kiosks, installing the fence.
Have you had any further discussions or correspondence with the abutter since the last meeting?
Since the last meeting, I followed up with them via phone just to give them an update on sort of what happened at the hearing or at the meeting. I let them know that there was an interest from the committee to pursue posts instead of just a fence, and they seemed somewhat relieved by that. So that's the last I've spoken to them, is just to give them an update.
I also left a message offering to have a conversation, but didn't get a call back, so I imagine that your conversation was ample. And I noticed, and I just did the calculation, if we were, instead of install a fence, install the posts every 8 feet, which could be converted into a fence if this were not adequate to achieve the 2 goals that you described, the new total is $17,024.
Two questions. Would you prefer to have rails or no rails? That's the first question. And the second question is, have you looked at, if we go with no rails now, do rails every 16 feet? Because then you're going to cut your cost, but you still retain the flexibility of inserting a rail every other length, so that you now have 8-foot length if you decide to go with rails later.
That's interesting. So for your first question, I can only answer from a personal standpoint. There is an existing fence on the property, and so the fence that I originally scoped out was to match that fence. And so personally, from a land management perspective, I appreciate features that look the same. All of our signs look the same, all of our kiosks look the same. It's sort of a branding, if you will, of conservation land. And so I personally like the concept of a matching fence. However, any boundary marker, any permanent boundary marker would help tremendously with this project. I have not considered the every other rail scenario. My only concern, because it seems to be an all rails or no rails situation, is stability. I don't know if just by having one section of fence with rails, if there would be any concern from the fence company about overall stability of that structure. That's the only thing I can think of.
I guess my point is, if you did the rail every 20 feet, or post every 20 feet, it's a $6,500 charge. So if you do it every 16 feet, you're going to be much closer to the $6,500 charge than the $13,000 8-foot charge.
Okay. I'm not sure I 100% follow you, but the posts themselves need to be 8 feet apart to have rails inserted. They can't do a length longer than 8 feet. So we would still be putting in posts every 8 feet, and then we would be installing rails in every other section. Does that make sense to you?
I thought the idea was we were going to have possibility of just posts with no rails.
Correct. And so just posts with no rails at 8 feet is the 13,000 number.
My point is, if you then only do it post every 16 feet, you can always go back and add another post so that you could add rails if you chose to later.
I understand.
And that will cut dramatically the cost of doing a post-only installation.
I thought you were proposing posts every 16 feet with rails in between them, which
No.
exceeds the length of the
No.
board. Got it. That's an option.
I have a question. Lonnie, since I was the liaison to the Lehner property when we purchased it, I'm concerned that I thought that when we purchased for $5 million, the surveying should have been very clear. I'm surprised we would need to survey anything to know where the boundaries are. They should be crystal clear that was only 2 years ago. So, and you're giving me a survey cost, or the committee, so can you explain why that would need to be done at this point?
The property was surveyed. The boundaries were marked with temporary wooden stakes.
Okay.
Those stakes have been removed.
By?
I don't know.
Okay.
Not me.
No, no. Believe me, I promise you, I didn't think that at all. Okay, thank you. That's concerning.
At the heart of this, it relates to public access. Is there a master plan of sorts for the Lehner property, long-term public access, and how many people are we protecting the abutters against 5 years, 10 years from now?
Sure. In conversations with the abutter, I no longer think it's a matter of, at least within the last 2 years, it doesn't seem that their concern is as strong as mine in terms of visitors coming onto their property. From experience, they said that it's, a handful of times at most. So I don't know that we would really see benefits in that particular area. I think as you view the land right now, it doesn't appear as though you can walk on it as a member of the public. So I don't know that we would be really achieving any great goals by avoiding accidental trespass. I think we would be achieving much more by making it clear that people were welcome to walk there in the first place.
Is there a master plan to promote the use, like Lehner property, holistically rather than just the fence, in order to get more people on the land using it?
Sure. We'll get there in baby steps. First came signage, next comes trail marking. It's lacking a formal parking area. Unfortunately, South Pleasant Street was recently paved, so there's a moratorium on the road in terms of getting a parking area in there. But yes, it has long been envisioned as being fully open to the public. It's missing a few key amenities at this point to make it fully accessible and enjoyable to everyone. But from the very beginning, even before the town decided to purchase it, we were considering where would we put a parking area? Do the trails connect to Jacobs Meadow? From a true recreational standpoint, how easy would it be for people to get around on loop trails, visit other properties, find their car again? Vicki, you might be able to add more to that, but I think from the very beginning it was long envisioned as a critical piece in that portion of town that would be open to the public. Mm-hmm.
What portion of the budget, if any, was set aside to clear the decorative fencing, which indicates to anyone passing by that it's actually owned by the house as opposed to owned by the public?
No portion of the budget. I feel like that's something that could be absorbed by myself and staff, town staff. Trail clearing, volunteers, brush removal, fence removal. We're constantly being approached by members of the scouting organizations in town that are looking for projects where they have to put in so many hours of community service. It's not a budgetable item. I feel like that's a few hours on a Saturday that a group of volunteers and myself and maybe the staff in my office could take care of easily.
Anybody else? Questions from the floor? Okay. Thank you, Lonnie.
Thank you very much.
Next up is the purchase of the Benjamin Lincoln House by the Historical Society for $972,000. Deirdre Anderson and Paula Bagger presenting.
Did everybody get a folder?
Should we go through it as you talk?
No,
Okay.
for your reference as you're reviewing the project. Well, while we're counting down, I'll start. My name's Paula Bagger, and I'm the president of the Hingham Historical Society, and my tech support here is Deirdre Anderson, our executive director, and I appreciate the chance to speak with you again about our request for a $972,000 grant from CPA funds to make possible the purchase of the Benjamin Lincoln House. I'm not going to belabor the primary message of my first presentation, which is that this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to safeguard an important part of our nation's history. Rather, I want to You can click it if you can. I want to focus on the opportunities that will be created by the contributions of three major stakeholders in the project. First, the town, who we are asking to provide the purchase price. Second, the Lincoln descendants, who are donating valuable and historically significant furnishings and artifacts. And third, the Hingham Historical Society, which is raising an endowment that will cover routine maintenance and basic operations at the property, and is also accepting the responsibility for substantial future costs associated with preserving and interpreting the property. The Society's board has voted to accept the purchase of the Lincoln House, provided that it can raise the purchase price, the subject of this CPC application, and a $1 million endowment. The $1 million figure represents the sum needed to earn $40,000 in annual investment return. $40,000 is the amount that is required to cover routine maintenance of the property and increased operating costs directly caused by the acquisition. The three categories included in the annual $40,000 estimated expenses include utilities, general maintenance, insurance, and additional personnel costs, a part-time custodial handyman, and a small amount of office administrative and fundraising grant writing assistance. The last of which is a nod to the fact that we will be raising money for the Benjamin Lincoln House in perpetuity. What is not included in the endowment figure are capital expenses, work needed to transfer a private home into a public space, and the curatorial work of developing scripts, exhibits, and other interpretive material. Preserving, interpreting, and sharing the story of the house and its occupants is at the core of the stated mission of the Hingham Historical Society. We collect, preserve, and interpret the history of the town of Hingham. And we have a very good track record of doing that. We have provided a great return on the town's investment. We have ensured the continued existence of and the town's access to historical properties over the last century. One reason the town reacted so strongly to the news that the Lincoln descendants were going to sell is that the family has been so generous in sharing their home with us. In our campaign to acquire the property, it is important to the Society to maintain that sense of collective ownership. With the generous permission of the Lincoln descendants, we plan to open the house to the public even before title passes. We are training a team of tour guides that come this spring will start offering public tours of the Benjamin Lincoln House and are developing a series of tours, including children's tours and other specialized interest tours that will be open to the public. And there are two good reasons to do this. First, we want to show the town what it is that we are asking them to help us purchase. Second, it will ensure that we are able to hit the ground running with public tours and programming at the house immediately after the acquisition. Should the Society be so fortunate as to acquire the property, our concern for public access will continue. Our models are our two existing properties, the Old Ordinary and the Heritage Museum. We had more than 2,000 visits to these properties in 2019. Opening to the public for tours at the Old Ordinary and offering exhibits, programs, and independent research opportunities at the Heritage Museum. A great deal of study will be needed to determine which of these models will be more appropriate to the Benjamin Lincoln House and how the property will be configured after it's purchased. But it's safe to say that the Society is committed to, first, working closely with the Hingham Public Schools to open the house for educational purposes. Second, opening the property for public tours on a schedule and with content devised to provide broad access with the house in a manner consistent with responsible stewardship. We will make the property available to researchers in relevant fields of history, material culture, architecture, and archaeology. And we will host programming relevant to the property, again, in a manner that is respectful of the property's special demands. The other pre-acquisition planning that we are engaged in involves plans to work with the town and other private stakeholders to develop an historical campus, which would be anchored by the Benjamin Lincoln House, but would take advantage of the concentration of significant historical properties in the tight radius around Hingham Square. These include, at a minimum, Old Ship Church, the Heritage Museum, the Hingham Cemetery, New North Church, Fountain Square, the Benjamin Lincoln House, and the Old Ordinary. When we sought CPC funds for the restoration and expansion of Old Derby 7 years ago, we held out the vision of economic stabilization of the Hingham Square area through the promotion of historic tourism and increased foot traffic in the square. We already see this happening, with folks coming to our properties from all 50 states, well, actually only 49. Nobody from Arkansas has ever come to our properties. And a growing number of people, interestingly, who are day tripping from Boston on commuter rail and on the boat to see Hingham's historical resources. We've successfully partnered with other organizations to welcome groups coming through town for a Hingham historical experience, through tours through the downtown Hingham area. And that picture is Bob Malmy of our staff giving a tour, running from the Heritage Museum up to the Old Ordinary last summer for the teachers from the Gilder Lehrman seminars. We invite the town and other organizations to join us in our efforts to create this campus. We are putting together a study group to go up to Concord, Massachusetts to meet with its new tourism director, and we hope that the town will send a representative and help us with that. The benefits of an historical campus extend beyond the economic, however. In our partnership with the Hingham schools, we are developing ties that strengthen our understanding and our children's understandings of their history. A couple of recent examples. The high school recently had a World War II field trip with visits not only to the Heritage Museum, but GAR Hall and the Dock House Museum. The 11th graders had an abolition field trip. They visited the Hingham Heritage Museum and New North Church, which was a center of abolitionist activity in the 19th century. And I want to give a plug for our upcoming 2-part religious history program scheduled for the spring, which will involve visits to 6 different Hingham churches. So in my first presentation, I said that this was a very big opportunity that requires us all to think big, and that continues to be my and our view. The Society urges CPC to fund the full acquisition cost of the property using its bonding tools, if necessary. We understand that one objection to full funding may be the sense that the town is giving a large sum of money to a private entity that will then own the property. One condition that might be appropriate if the town were to fully fund the acquisition would be an obligation on the society's part to offer the town a right of first refusal should the society not be able to, or circumstances change and they can't own the property anymore, or the right to repay the town the purchase price of the property. We do ask the CPC to consider seriously the benefits of bonding, which would allow us to leverage favorable municipal borrowing terms to benefit what really is and should be a public-private partnership. As I said before, if we allow this opportunity to acquire the Benjamin Lincoln House to slip away, the town will be worse for it, and I ask each of you for your vote for full funding of the Society's request.
Vicki, you want to kick it off since you're the liaison?
Absolutely, great presentation, thank you. Clearly, you've given a lot of thought to how this can be a public-private partnership. And, I mean, obviously, this is a great asset, not just for the house, but for all of the artifacts inside. And this is an opportunity for kids to learn so much about history, and that's what Hingham is all about. So I appreciate, do you want to share with us where your fundraising is today? I guess that would be because the endowment is clearly part of any historic house, and I come from a historic family, and I know what it takes to have an endowment and make sure that the long-term ability to take care of these kinds of facilities is met, so.
Sure, at this point, we're a little bit north of $500,000.
Good. So it's ongoing.
So we've made
and
progress since
Great.
our last meeting.
which obviously shows the town is squarely behind you.
Other questions?
The current owner is generous here and interested in selling to the town. Have there been any discussions between you and the owner about stretching out the payments to them as opposed to bonding so we could give them a lump sum to basically agree to pay them over time and periodic payments?
Well, I think, it's my understanding that the CPC is not able to promise iterative payments, right? It's one per customer, whether it's bonded or paid in full. I think that the board of the society has clearly stated that they do not feel that they're in a position to undertake debt to acquire the house, which is what that suggestion would require.
I have a couple of questions. And I agree it was a strong presentation. One question is, you had said, I think it was at the November presentation, that the endowment for the Historical Society currently is about $900,000, and that is an endowment for the Heritage Museum and for Old Ordinary and for the Annex. And I was just wondering why $1 million is needed for the one structure when you have $900,000 that covers 2 and a fraction structures.
Because our endowment for the society should be much higher. In 1967, when we took on Old Derby Academy, it was because it was in risk of coming down, right? And the society stepped up and purchased it. And there was no endowment, and it has been economic difficulty, in fact, for a long time. That was one of the impetuses for the Heritage Museum project, sort of a go big or go home thing, which is actually working well for us.
Okay.
But it is not a sufficient endowment for the properties we have.
And to Dan's point a little bit, back at the December meeting, Dot had brought up something that she referred to the owners being willing to hold an interest-free mortgage for 3 years, taking it out to June of 22 instead of June 2020. And then I had a conversation with Deirdre after that, and she said that was something that was said in passing, that in no way is something that is, it's not a thing. It was a thought that was mentioned, but it wasn't something that was agreed upon or discussed at length or anything like that. But just in case the committee doesn't vote to bond it and to give a portion of the money, this is a suggestion, you can take it or leave it, you might want to pursue that line of questioning and find out if that would be a possibility, because that could ease things up.
Well, I mean, I guess I've got a couple answers to that. I've had no such discussions with either Rose Woodard or Franklin Beverage, and the Woodards are not the only owners of the property. But leaving that aside, again, I think as I told Mr. White, that's not really the issue. The issue is whether the society will undertake debt to purchase the house, and there is not appetite for that.
What about, I understand about the $1 million endowment. Is it truly critical for the $1 million endowment to be in place the minute the house passes papers, or can it be built up over time?
I think that any responsible steward of a property like this wants and needs the endowment. If you go talk to Historic New England, if you go talk to the trustees, if you go talk to Audubon, and we have talked to all of them in our due diligence for this acquisition, they will tell you that they will accept a property that comes endowed. And in fact, the trustees shared with me their checklist of how they put together their endowment, and that's one thing that we used as a model, that they put together with their number.
Okay. Other questions?
Sure. You provided in the package an appraisal report, and I just had a couple questions about it. The way I read the report, at the end it says, attached is my report containing supporting market data, commentary, and exhibits. But I don't see any attachments.
It's about 60 pages long. We're happy to make the entire thing available to anybody who wants it, but it's a big book.
It's hard to analyze an appraisal without seeing the comparables that are used, the limiting conditions, the exhibits. I'm getting his conclusion, but nothing to look at the basis for his conclusion.
We're happy to provide the full appraisal. It's just a very big document.
My fault, because when I was told it was 60 pages, I thought they didn't need to do 60 pages for everybody, but I think that absolutely they can provide it for you, for your review.
And then,
You're a lawyer. We
on
get
the first page of the report, the last paragraph identifies that there were, the report was based on limitations or stated scope of work, purpose of the appraisal, reporting requirements, and definition of market value. Is there any documentation as to what the appraiser was charged with in terms of the scope of work, purpose of appraisal, reporting requirements, and what the definition of market value was that they would use?
I can't tell you. I wasn't as familiar with it. I see that there's the statement of limiting conditions. I'll see if it's in the other 55 pages and we can get you an answer. Otherwise, I'm familiar with the oral discussion when the man was hired, which was he was asked to appraise the property and was sent the preservation restriction, and he came and visited the house and looked around and wrote a very long report. And I don't mean that answer to be flip, but we can certainly provide the report and see if it includes any of that information.
Given that the society has said that they don't have an appetite to mortgage in order to fund the acquisition, what will the society do if this committee voted to give you less than the full purchase price? What will happen?
I think we'll continue to attempt to raise money and hope that we're able to satisfy the internal requirements for acquisition of the property.
The ask is that the town, through the CPC, provide 100% of the purchase price. Is there any reason why the town shouldn't become a co-owner or take title and have the society be the steward, endowed steward maintaining the property, as opposed to taking $1 million of town money essentially and turning it over to a private society to be the owner?
I think it was our understanding that the town didn't have an appetite to be purchasing and owning real estate. I will tell you that I had an interesting little research project through the database of the state CPC, looking to see what happens in these circumstances. And while Hingham has never spent town money to acquire, to allow a private entity to acquire an historic building, it happens in other towns, and there were a number of comparables. One reason we suggested the right of first refusal is that's one thing that does pop up in conditions in other towns when, the town funds the acquisition by an historical society. Everything's great as long as the historical society is in fact there running it for the public interest, but the concern is then the society tries to sell it, to somebody else, an asset that was actually funded by someone else, and so the feeling is that a right of first refusal at no cost, that essentially, if the town wants it, it's turned over to the town. If the society no longer can or wants to, or, you're predicting what's going to happen in the future, own it itself. There were some instances, certainly, where the town took title and entered into a 99-year lease or something like that to the private entity. As I say, we had no indication that the town had an appetite for that, and so that wasn't something that we have pursued.
And just to add to that, we do have an understanding in a letter of intent with the homeowners that this is time sensitive, that they have agreed to take the home off of the market, which we all know it went on the public market in the spring of 2019 at a market where a diligent market appraisal was done, and it was listed for more than our independent appraisal and put on the market, and pursuing, if the town does want to be a landlord and own property, that would that's adding more time to this schedule, and I wouldn't want to jeopardize. We have incredible partners in these homeowners who, I know CPC likes the metric of a third. We're raising, north of $1 million to endow this property as the Historical Society. We're asking for the town's tax assessed value, which they've agreed to sell the house for. And then it bears repeating, which came up in our initial presentation, that should we able to acquire the property for a public historic site, the homeowners have agreed to donate, an incredibly valuable collection of historic artifacts. So, the appraised value, the tax assessed value of $972,000 is, we're not just buying real property, we're buying a museum. And we're hoping that you see that we in town, if you look around, that we're good stewards to run that museum.
And with respect to your request for acquisition price and Ms. Bagger's comment about right of first refusal, you also said, or refund of the CPC grant. Is it the society's position that if the society decided it no longer wanted to own the property, that it would it agree that it would give the town the right of first refusal, and if the town elected not to exercise the right of first refusal, and the society would then sell, that the society would then refund the entirety of the purchase price, essentially, or the CPC grant, and then the society would retain whatever profit it generated from the sale?
I think that's right, although I'm trying to follow it through. It struck me that the far likeliest situation is that the Historical Society, in some future years, falls on hard times and can't support the house. If the house is worth that much, it strikes me as unlikely that to have a scenario where you could sell it, and I'm getting mixed up. I think the answer is yes, but I think that there's either going to be a situation where we would offer it to the town, or we would offer the town the money. Certainly, if we offered it to the town and it was worth that much, the town could flip it. If the town didn't want it. And that's one reason why the money is the logical alternative.
My thinking is if you're, as you indicated, correct that the town doesn't have the appetite to become an owner, so it declines to exercise its right of first refusal, would you consent to a CPC grant that would condition the acceptance on, we get a right of first refusal, and if we don't exercise and you sell, we get our money back from the proceeds of sale?
Yeah, I think the only reason I didn't articulate it that way is because I'm not going to be a guarantor of what the sale price is. in
Up to
30
whatever-
years from now.
We get our money back up to the point we collect, and if you have less than sufficient net proceeds, then obviously you can't pay back the CPC grant.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right, and I guess I'm being a cautious lawyer just like you are. I'd like to see it all written down because it's turning around a little bit in my head, but I think we're talking about the same thing.
Thank you.
And it's my strong belief that the Hingham Historical Society will want to keep this house forever and will be able to. I'm just trying to, was trying to come up with something that would allay a fear, that you're going to give us all this money and then we'll
Thank you.
sell it to the next person who comes along.
These are good questions. It could be hammered out when we, if that's what happens, we can hammer it out in the grant agreement. We could put in whatever terms we want, and they could sign it or not sign
I
it.
just
Yeah,
don't
you
want us
wanted to get a
allocate
read.
our money and then have the society say, no, we don't want it under those terms.
Yeah.
I wanted to get a sense of,
I think we're
What they were
talking
willing
about
to
the
do.
same thing, but it's complicated, but I believe we're saying the same thing.
Other questions? Dan?
Can the endowment that you're raising, is that solely tied to the house? It can never be used for anything else?
I think that we would certainly accept a condition that if we raised the $1 million endowment, which is, as I say, the minimum to accept the house, that $1 million, yes, that would be placed in a restricted fund so that it was used only for the house. That would be appropriate.
Others? From,
Thank you for a strong presentation. And my question with regards to, they are not listed within here, the adverse conditions found by the appraiser, were they within the realm of the endowment that you currently have to be taken care of?
So I'm not exactly sure what he's talking about. Some things that he considered an adverse condition were that there wasn't a 3-car garage. I mean, those were
And there never
considered
will
in
be.
Hingham an adverse thing.
Right.
Things having to do, we did get
Inspection.
we did have a homeowner's inspection, just like you'd always get when you're buying a house. It came back quite clean, exceptionally clean for a 400-year-old house. But the second answer, or the more important answer, is probably no. As I said, capital repairs are not something that are covered by this minimum endowment that the board has said, as responsible stewards, they need. A number of reasons for that. One is, can't set the bar too high, but the other one is, in our examination of available grants, we have a degree of confidence that should we come to own the house and discover that the clapboarding in the dairy room corner is getting a little spongy or something, for a National Historic Landmark, there will be grants that will help us with that.
anyone else? From the floor? Can you come to a mic?
Thank you. Keith German, Director of Veteran Services for the town of Hingham. Before I make my remarks, I'd like to offer my condolences to Mr. Burke for the recent passing of his mother. Mr. Chairman, members of the board, as a director, I would be remiss if I did not mention that the Major General is Hingham's most famous veteran. Not only is he famous here within our town, he's famous within the Commonwealth and the nation at large. His picture literally hangs in the rotunda. If we were to let these treasures that were mentioned, that would be part and parcel of the purchase, slip through our fingers, it would be a national, state, and town travesty. So I raise as a proponent of this project and hope that we all see here that sometimes doing the right thing, right, costs money. And being stewards of the town and being a town that really holds itself high on historic values, that's why people move here and for the schools. I think it would be a tragedy locally, statewide, and nationally to let this slip into private hands. Thank you, sir.
Thank you for your comments and for your passion. Anyone else Okay, thanks. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Okay. So next up, we have Bill Ramsey and Alec McMillan for the Benjamin Lincoln statue.
Come up here. You can come up here. Come up. I did prepare a presentation. I'm not sure if it's loaded or not. Do I need to load the presentation, or is it? Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I can do it. Too.
Bill, do you have a thumbnail drive with you? If it's
No,
not,
I emailed it in as you directed. Yeah. Okay, all right. I sent it to the person you indicated. Yeah, okay.
if
Well,
you should have your PowerPoint slide. If you feel at a disadvantage, and
Well.
if you felt that you couldn't give your strongest presentation without the PowerPoint slide and you felt at a disadvantage, maybe it would be okay with my committee if you switched to tomorrow night, and I would make sure that the PowerPoint slide is on there. So you should let us know, and then we can talk.
That's okay, I'll just talk to the project.
Okay.
First of all, I apologize for being late tonight. When I looked at the agenda this morning, we were third on it, so I'm not sure what the discussion was or what transpired, so I'm kind of coming in blind to whatever was discussed previously. Yeah, please.
Catch you up. So I had thought that we couldn't consider your project based on what I had learned from Stuart Saganor. And the group felt that that was a unilateral decision on my part, and we needed to think collectively about whether the project was eligible based on the information. And in the meantime, I'm also trying to reach town council to see if he wants to respond to the new information. And what we decided was we're going to, next Wednesday is our votes on the recommendation for the amounts of money. And before we take those votes, we will discuss and have a separate vote on the eligibility of the project. And if a majority feels the project is eligible despite what we've learned, then we'll take a vote on money. And if the majority feels it's not eligible, we won't consider the project for money. So that's what you missed.
Okay, all right, so,
But tonight, the committee feels you should keep going as if it's eligible because we haven't had the discussion.
okay, all right, and
And you're welcome to discuss eligibility too.
Sure, and there's no way we can bring the slides up. There's no way we can bring those slides up?
Right now, no, but that's why I was saying if you feel at a
Yeah,
disadvantage.
I'd rather just do it tonight, okay.
Okay.
So as people know from my last presentation, I think it was in November at this point, applicant team is myself, 55 North Street, Alec McMillan, Sevi Strekalowski is our architect, Matt Falconeri is the landowner of the parcel, and the sculptor is Susan Laurie. Susan Laurie is a nationally renowned sculptor. She's done projects not only in Hingham with respect to St. Paul's Church, the library, the Foss statue, but she's done them all over the country. Babe Ruth, that's absolutely right. That's Babe. I didn't know if anybody would know Babe Ruth, but she did Babe Ruth too. Right, yeah.
When she was up here, I have gone through what she had done. Yeah.
I was going to name Babe Ruth, but I didn't know people knew it. But that's correct. Her and I have talked about Babe Ruth. Susan and I, we've actually become, over the past 2 years, we've become pretty close friends. We talk about this project maybe once a week through email or text, different ideas she has, different things going on with the project. So her and I have become pretty good friends through it. We talk a lot about it. So as you know, the proposed location, it's at the old side of the glass parcel. The impetus here was that we were looking for a location in the downtown area. The landowner, Matthew Falconeri, and I discussed it. And he's been wonderful to work with. He's been enthusiastically on board really since the project's inception, since I proposed it to him. As he went through the permitting process, he talked about it a lot. Before I started this CPC funding cycle in the fall, I reached out to him again. We met. Sevi was there as well, and Matt very kindly not only offered his support for the project in terms of land, but he also offered us the in-kind contribution to help us with costs. He's going to do all the brickwork around the statute, the base of the statute, and do a lot of costs that are going to save us quite a bit of money in the process. The statute itself, talk a little bit about that. We were initially, about a year ago, we were looking at a statute that was going to be about 7.5 feet. It was believed by Ms. Lowry that you want to make a statute that's larger than life. And we initially looked at a 7-foot statute. In order to accommodate Mr. Falconeri's concern with respect to a giant statute, we've reduced it now. We reduced it in height to where it is now, which is about 7. I'm sorry, it is 7 feet now. It's going to be 9 feet, about 7. We took him off the pedestal, so he's on the ground. It helped us lowering the height of the General Lincoln, helped us to reduce costs. We also made him a little slimmer. That helped us reduce quite a bit of costs. And we removed the sword. He has the sword on him, but initially the sword was going to be out in front of him. Ms. Lowry indicated that a statute of this nature, it's not good to have that off a pedestal for concern of children jumping on it, breaking it. So we've kind of moved it to the back of the General. Good news is with this project, a year ago we were looking at costs approximately $250,000. Now we're down to about $170,000. We've with a very generous contribution from the Historical Commission. We have $75,000 already. We keep receiving individual donations throughout the course of the year. And Andrew can maybe speak to that as well. Just last week we picked up, somebody read about our efforts in the paper, and they sent in a $500 check. So that process is ramping up now as we see how we do here. And we've also, with respect to cost reductions, the park statute area was going to have 3 other rocks or monuments discussing the General's town service, military service, and federal and state service. We've removed that. Carol Piles gave me the great suggestion of how to get the benches donated, so that saved us some money too with the benches donated. And obviously, Mr. Falconeri's in-kind contribution of the brickwork is going to help us to reduce the cost. And also, I worked with Susan Lowry to streamline the budget as well. So we're in a good place, a lot better place than where we were last year. And also, since I last met, one of the requirements that the committee emphasized to us that we needed to get a procedural vote from the Board of Selectmen before we're advancing. This has been a big part with this project. I was able to get on their agenda in July, and myself, Sevi, Gary Torniff-Dick, Larry attended the meeting as well, and the Selectmen did not discuss the merits of this project for obvious reasons. They didn't want to compromise the CPC vote, but they did unanimously endorse the project moving forward. And Karen Johnson, the chairman, did a wonderful job explaining the process, the town acquisition process. It was a very positive meeting for us. So with that, I'll turn it over to my colleagues if they'd like, or I'm happy to field some questions. Want to add anything else?
Well, all I can say, just to say a couple of things, because I've read the correspondence and the conversations you have with the state, and just some comments that we've looked at placing the statue so that it works for the developer and the now owner of a real quality retail space there. So that's why it's placed the way it is, not in front of the major window, but aligning with the front of the building. But what's unique about this street configuration is the sidewalk is very wide there. It's not a sort of town-regulated sidewalk. I saw the comments that the state had about Norwell, and Norwell has very few sidewalks, and I think they were trying to get a town sort of responsibility for sidewalks provided by the state. I'm not sure what that background was, but this is unique, and it's also, I was sorry I didn't see the whole presentation of the downtown historic campus, but this is very much in line with that. Deirdre Anderson and I are going to be involved in talking with Mass Cultural Council about creating a cultural district, which Hingham would be so qualified to have. There are no towns in the South Shore, as I know, without one, but to connect and to connect the spaces, to make it a pedestrian community and have quality open space. And open space and recreation are not just about soccer fields and hikes in the woods. It's the whole pedestrian experience, events and spaces that can be quite small, which this is, that are meaningful for a pedestrian experience. So this is the link to the harbor from the downtown. It's a very critical part of the goal that the planning board has expressed. And the fact that it's partially on the sidewalk, I think, is incidental to the argument that the state doesn't fund sidewalks as open space. This really is open space. It's where the mill pond turnaround was when there were boats coming in and unloading supplies. And we'll be paving and putting a bench. So it's going to be quite a nice 20-foot by 20-foot space that'll be a very appropriate kind of pedestrian open space, and that's recreation. It's passive recreation. So I think, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not going to get into that conversation, but I think there's justification, and particularly in view, community preservation, which you guys are, is about community preservation, and this is certainly, I think, should be part of the mission. And if the Mass Cultural Council gets involved, I would hope that the CPC would be part of that process, because it's a huge opportunity.
Yes, Alec Macmillan. I'm the town historian currently, but for a number of years I was chairman of the Historical Commission. And throughout this period, for a number of years, I've been trying to get interest in a statue of Benjamin Lincoln. And it mainly is something where the first consideration is where to put it. And more than a year ago, we had a group of people, including the Board of Selectmen and others, who toured the downtown, along with our sculptors, toured the downtown to look at various sites where the statue might go. And it was one thing that was clear to us then, that it could not go on top of the, which was my first thought, on top of the tunnel. This land belongs to the MBTA, so that was not a possibility, right in the downtown there. And we walked all around, and including this site. And this site has a lot to be said for it, because it is at this very location that the first Hingham settlers stepped ashore into Hingham. And you will see across from the intersection, you'll see a little marker that it was put up by the, I guess it was the League of whatever it was, but in any event.
Daughters of the American Revolution.
Daughters of the American Revolution. And which they marked that site. And it seems to me a very good location for the Lincoln statue, in that there were a number of his ancestors, Lincolns, who were among those first settlers of Hingham. And the other attraction of that site is its location sort of halfway between what I think of as the square over by Talbot's and so on, and the harbor. Very often, I can remember in my youth being downtown, and people, there would be a lot of tourists who came to Hingham. What did they come for? Talbot's. And women would go to Talbot's store, and the men would want to wander around town and come back in an hour, that sort of thing. And I watched them a number of occasions walk toward the harbor, and when they got to this location of Station Street coming in there, with these unrelated buildings on opposites, they figured, well, that must be the end. And they would turn around and go back, and they wouldn't walk to the harbor. So I think we need to do something, and Sevia's talked about encouraging the view of downtown Hingham and its historic district as including not only the Talbots area and where the Abraham Lincoln statue is, but over through the square and down to the harbor, where there are a number of historical sites and another statue. So that's why I think the location was selected. And I do believe, regardless of what the chairman says somebody told him, that the statue could be constructed on that site. Now, if, rather than believe me or to trust us to build a statue there if we're able to do so, you want to believe your chairman instead, then we
I would
have...
appreciate it if you didn't take...
Excuse me?
I would appreciate it if you left personal remarks out of it.
It's not personal remarks.
I would like you to...
I said that the choices are if...
I would like you to stick to the value of your project and not refer to us individually as for or against the project.
Well, the question is...
Please
whether,
do not refer to me...
The question is whether you're going to support the project or not.
No, the question is,
Isn't
make
it?
a good case for your project. Do not make personal remarks in your presentation. Just refer to your project. Refer to the value of the project.
Yeah. Well, but I don't think we can do that without considering important objections that you have raised. We have to deal with them.
If you want to address my concerns, you should address my concerns. You should say, well, you said this, and this is why I think that's not a problem. Not if you're going to listen to your chairman. That's a personal remark, and I'm not going to allow it. Address the value of the project, and if you think that objections have been raised to the project that are not correct, explain why that is incorrect.
Well, if we can't talk about the objections that you have raised over a period of time, then I have nothing else to add.
Speak to the objection.
I have nothing else
I
to
want
add.
you to speak to the objections and
Okay.
say why they're not really
nothing else to
issues.
add.
Okay.
Maybe I can jump in with a question. Sure. General, unquestioned, from a historical perspective, is so important to the town. The news is late breaking from Stewart as to the definition of open space and recreational use. Do you have any reaction, given that it's, very recent, as to how we can fit this into the CPC requirements?
Yeah, I have two reactions to that. Thanks for the question, Dan. I received that opinion today. I just read it tonight on the way home from work, so I'm still kind of trying to figure it out. I think my biggest concern with that opinion is that I received it 24 hours ago, the day before this meeting, and what I anticipated to be a vote on the project, so it was difficult to respond to it. But I think more frustrating to me was receiving that so late in this process. And in his opinion, he does prescribe a path forward for something like this. And as this committee knows, over the past 2 years, we've jumped over every single hurdle that's been associated with this project. And if I had more time, I'd negotiate those hurdles as well. So my concerns are, I just received it 24 hours ago. The hurdles there cannot be, overcome within a short amount of time. But if I had this opinion a while back, I think I could have accomplished everything that needed to be done, as we've done with, can this committee fund statutes? Well, my understanding is Attorney Coughlin said it's up to you folks to do it. It's not.
That's kind of what he said last month. Let's see if he responds to the recent news.
Sure, but okay. But he did say that about a year ago, can this committee fund statute? And he said, well, it's up to the committee to do it. We had a pretty big hurdle of getting the selectmen procedural vote. I got that done. We presented last year with, what other money have you raised? We've raised some other money too. So, every hurdle that we've been given to get this project, this committee has really worked so hard to overcome. And we've really jumped through a lot of hoops to get to where we are now. And it's just so unfortunate that I received that 24 hours ago. And my ability to respond to it is somewhat compromised.
Okay, can I just ask, I know you addressed this, but how much money do you have on hand right now, including, I think there's
75,000, then we've received some personal contributions from residents of the town, not a significant amount.
Is that like 5,000, 2,000?
Probably less than that. I can't give you a definitive number, because it's going to the, Preservation Projects Fund. So, like I said, we just, the more people learn about it, the more interest there is. We just got a donation. A gentleman emailed me the day on New Year's Eve saying, "Hey, this is a great project. Can I give you a check?" And he sent him $500. So, as the interest grows with the project and the project starts coming more to life, more of that is happening. And then, obviously, depending upon how we do, we're going to, initiate a pretty significant outside private fundraising initiative as well to get us to our goal.
Okay, and do you have anything with respect to the issue as to whether CPC can donate funds to this project? Do you disagree with the opinion of Stuart Saginaw?
Well, as I said, I just looked at it. I just got it late today, and I looked at it on the train on the way home. So okay. I'd like to have some more time to take a look at that. And I'd like maybe, I'd also maybe like to have Town Real Estate Council maybe chime in on it as well.
My suggestion is we vote, I think, next week, so before that, if you can come up with any documentation, maybe an opinion from an attorney or town council or someone to submit it before that, so we can consider that.
I think the ask would have to come from the chair.
Yeah. I'm hoping he gets, I can't determine how and whether he's going to respond to me, but I tried 5 times today between emails and voicemails, and attorneys are busy and it's all last minute. I am assuming I'll get to hear from him, and I hope in writing, but I can't guarantee it.
One issue I have, and I don't know the statute very well, but is there a requirement that the property needs to be owned by the town?
Well, yes, there is, and we've moved forward on that.
Okay.
That was the meeting.
Is that in the statute itself?
So it was a requirement put forth by the chair that we get Board of Selectmen to weigh in on it procedurally. Would they support the acquisition of the easement? And they voted procedurally unanimously to support that going forward. Ultimately, an acquisition issue is going to be decided by town meeting, but the process as explained by the Board of Selectmen chair in December, and it was very well articulated and very well detailed, is that they were very comfortable with this process moving forward in terms of eligibility for funding from their view. They didn't speak to the merits of the project. I can send you the link to that meeting if you'd like, or I can send it through Larry, and Larry can disseminate it to the board.
Sure. Send it to your liaison, and he could send it
Sure.
on to whoever. Did you have questions, Kevin?
I have a couple of questions. I'm still a little fuzzy on the math, because I've seen a lot of Can you just detail for us exactly how much you've received and have in hand, and how that relates to the $100,000 ask?
So we have 75 definitively from Historical Commission.
Okay.
And I think, any idea of how much we've got?
Probably, let's see, with that
Maybe
$500 check,
1,000,
you know,
2,000.
That was just donated another 1,000.
So the 100,000 ask would make up the difference. I'd be happy to reduce it to 95, if the math makes more sense. Well, we get 75, we can reduce it to 95.
Yeah. If I could yield some of your time. So I was going to wait. Yeah, I was going to wait till Keith German, Director of Veteran Services. I was going to wait till you asked for the floor, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. But since you're talking about the things, as the director, I have within my powers funds from the War Memorial and the Veterans Fund. And tonight we are willing to pledge $1,000 to see that this nationally recognized Revolutionary War hero is fully displayed on honor somewhere within the town. And we want to put that forward to you tonight.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
So you have 76,000 essentially
Roughly,
in
yes.
hand, and that's where you get to the
So I'm happy to formally reduce the request to get to the 170. So it was $100,000 request as a random, but I'm happy to reduce that to make the difference up to the 170.
You got a $170,000 project.
Yes.
And you've got $76,000 that you've collected or have been pledged to you. Yeah, so it's.
Right.
It's just,
Got
so
it.
you're looking for 94 and you'd be very
Happy to take anything
Yeah.
at this point.
And the 94 could become less money if you collected more money.
Sure.
See, but that isn't the way a CPC application goes. When you submitted your application, you said you were going to raise $75,000 through private funding. You did not say it's a seesaw, and depending on what we get from CPC, we'll try to fill in the rest with private funding. Once you submit an application, that's your promise, that's your bonds, not with us, with the town. And you're saying, well, we won't need to raise the money that we said we would raise if you give us just about all of the money.
Yeah, it's a fundraising goal, Larry. It's our goal to make up the difference.
But that's not how
Well, it's
the
kind of like when you, got 220 from for the Ames Chapel, you guys were short, and didn't you privately fundraise the rest?
No, we
No?
set
You
up,
didn't- you
we
came
did
in
exactly
220
what
privately
the
fundraised first.
Historical Society is doing with the
Okay.
Benjamin Lincoln House. We said up front, we will ask for this much money from you, we will go for this much in grants, and we will private fundraise. And we didn't then say, if you give us more money, we'll private fundraise less money. It is very hard, private entities, fundraising is hard, and it's arduous. And you say you've been at this for 2.5 years, but my feeling is that's where your efforts need to be really strong. You made a commitment to the town with your application that you will raise $75,000. It's not about, well, we don't have to raise it if you give us more money. Look at your application. I mean, imagine if the Historical Society were saying that. Well, if you give us more than $972, then we have to raise less for the endowment. It doesn't go that way.
Well, again, it's a fundraising goal. The scope of the effort will be directed by how much we need to get.
But we can't interpret it as your goal. We have to interpret it as your commitment, because that's how you presented it in the application.
Well, we have 75,000.
What?
We have 75,000.
Right, and you said you were going to raise the other 75. So to me, that's an issue. You made that promise not to us, to the town, in us considering it. You didn't say, if we don't raise the other if you give us 100, we don't have to raise the other 75. That's just not how the application goes. But I want to make a couple of other points as well. Sevi, I don't think the CPC is saying there can't be a statue on that site. That could be a perfectly fine site for a statue, and a nice kind of environmentally enriching piece of art in between the square and the harbor. I think what the Community Preservation Coalition is saying, they cannot help pay for a statue on that land because from a legal definition, it is not designated parkland. Not that Hingham can't consider it a pocket park or anything like that, but just under their rules, they can't apply money to it. So that's where it's at. And what Stuart said to me over the phone was, if your town votes to award money to this project, you are at big risk of losing your state match in CPC funds because you will have run afoul of the law. It's not, he didn't see it as an opinion. He was, and by the way, he's a very circumspect guy. Whenever I call him, he says, oh, you can look at it different ways, speak to town council. He was very dismayed that we were going down this road. So yes, you can consider it open land. You can put a statue on there. Matt can agree to it. He's going to brick the place over anyway, whether there's a statue or not. So I'm kind of a little fuzzy on how it's an in-kind contribution because you said yourself, Bill, he's going to put bricks on it. But the question isn't anymore about just a simple easement, which at that Board of Selectmen meeting last month, they said you can go forward and CPC can continue its independent analysis, and if they vote money for it, town meeting can vote us to allow an easement, but it doesn't require us to have an easement. But it's much more complicated than an easement now. It's about what is designated parkland, and the sidewalk thing is because two different entities own this land. One is Falconeri, and one is the town. And what he was referring to with the Norwell precedent was somebody came to Norwell CPC and said, let's put a sidewalk along certain roadways in Norwell, and we're submitting this under recreation. And CPC said, okay, and CPC was sued because those are transportation roadways. They're not designated parkland, and CPC lost, and the money could not go to it. It's that. We can't afford to have that kind of, it's more than egg on our face. It's a fear of losing the CPC match.
It's going to be clarified, but I think it's totally different from a sidewalk that a town is responsible to provide where there are school buses. This is much more than a sidewalk. It's a very odd, unusual width, and it's related to the fact that there was a big turnaround there. You remember in the previous project, the curb was moved, and so it really is a pocket park. And
I
it's
agree.
Passive recreation.
Respectfully, I thought we all agreed we were going to debate the eligibility at a properly noticed meeting, i.e. the next meeting.
We're going to.
Seems to me we're essentially debating that issue now, and tonight is the time for the applicant to make their presentation.
Not exactly. We're going to vote on eligibility next week, and we agreed that eligibility was allowed to be addressed tonight in light of this new information.
I'm not sure we agreed to that, and I'm not sure it's fair to the applicant to give them some paperwork yesterday or today and then expect them to defend their position tonight.
The problem with the paperwork coming in, I hear you that it's hard to respond to this new information so late in the game. I look at it as, thank God we got this information in time. But we can table this discussion. There's no disagreement about how the land can be configured to use as a statue. It's all about legal designations and what CPC funds are allowed to be used for. And you're welcome and encouraged to come to our meeting next week when we...
Sorry, can I just add one just point of clarification in doing the research about this land designation, as you call it. In Hingham, we call it, in all of Massachusetts, it's zoning. And in Hingham, we have no parkland zoning. It doesn't, I mean, as far as I know, is there a parkland zoning?
No.
There is no parkland in Hingham. So what you're saying is that the statute couldn't go on any land in Hingham because we have no parkland in Hingham.
I'm not sure about that.
There is no, believe me, from a zoning perspective, we have no parkland in Hingham. We have official and open space. And it is entirely possible that a parcel could be designated official and open space. That happens all the time.
Absolutely, but it has to be done through the state, and that's part of this.
No, we're in charge of our own zoning in Hingham. Just from a zoning perspective, that's the only, I just wanted to clarify, we do not have parkland in Hingham. We have official and open space, and it's local zoning that creates official and open space.
I hear you,
That's all.
and we have a state law to contend with.
Town council, absolutely. I can't believe town council can't respond to this in a timely fashion. That's town council's job. So we seem to be debating an issue that none of us can come to an answer to. So in fairness to everybody,
request town council to give a formal opinion, and if town council is unable to do it by next week, proceed assuming it's allowed, and then, address that issue.
Town council can certainly get back.
Let's see if let's table that part and hope that we hear from town council, and let's return to the value of the project.
Okay. If I could just ask one question.
Sure.
Let's say we gave you money, but not 95,000. What do you really think you could raise if we gave you a portion of it, and to make the project happen?
Well, I've talked to quite a few people who've done this before, and they're committed to doing this. I can't give you a definitive number, but we're going to get there. I think we're going to get there, and eventually we'll get there. And I'm hoping that CPC can help us get there. I think this is there are a lot of people in the community behind this project. It's a good project for the community. It's a community preservation fund. So we're just asking for a little bit of help. Hopefully, we would love to get all of it. We would be happy with some of it.
Judy?
I hate to be debating with you, Larry. I hope you're not taking it personally, but the point that you made about the commitment to fundraising, I totally understand. So I looked at this application again, and I see that the total estimated cost is $250,000. the applicant has reduced that amount by $70,000. And so I'm just not so sure that we then have to say, well, that reduction of 70,000 comes out of the request from the CPA, but doesn't come out of your commitment to fundraise. You know what I'm saying? So I do think that these numbers change in these applications during the course of the project. We're asking the Lehner property to change, and give different estimates. I mean, we're trying to work with the applicant to figure out what's possible for the town. This is a vision for the town, right? And so I would be reluctant, because the project has changed, the cost has come down by $70,000 from the request. I'd be reluctant to tie them to every other number on the page.
If I could just add to that too, I look at the cost reduction as a very positive development.
Yes.
Not the one that should be held against us. I think it's a good development. Myself, Susan Lowry, we looked at the entire budget, and we reduced every possible way we could. As I said, I reduced the plaques that were going to be dedicated to him. I got an angle on getting the benches donated. We readjusted what the general was going to look like. You can see that in your packet. So we looked at our budget. We said, hey, we got to get this budget down. Susan reduced her costs. So for us to be at 170 now, I think is a very, very positive development. I'm surprised that it's almost like being held against us at the 75,000 goal, but we are where we are.
It's not being held against you. It's something you committed to. And to Judy, I would just say, reasonable people can disagree. I'm not seeing it the way you're seeing it.
May I ask a question? And I think you've had this question before from me. We have extremely limited funds and very large ask. Can you give us your best answer as to why we should do this now as opposed to letting you continue to raise funds and defer for a year? And before you answer, I simply would suggest, I concur with committee member Sneath's comment that the numbers are all changing, and I personally don't think you should necessarily be bound to, I promise to raise 75, given that numbers change.
Well, thank you for that. And so to answer your question, we were here before. Well, first of all, I know you have a lot of tough decisions to make, and I appreciate the work you all do. So regardless of how you fund my project, you have a lot of great projects. I wish you'd give them all 100% funding, and very supportive of the other project. This committee is also very supportive of the Benjamin Lincoln House effort, obviously honoring the same person. With respect to waiting, I'm concerned that we had a difficult time with the location. It really took a wonderful guy, Matt, to come along and offer the location to us and to work with us. I don't know if that location is going to be available in a year. And then if we lose that location, there are some other obstacles of where else to put it that are pretty detailed and complicated. And then we also lose possibly lose his offer to help us with some costs. So we would lose that. We lose funding. I think there's a limitation on the Greenbush mitigation funds that I need to speak to Andrea more about. So we could lose some of that. And I think the momentum for the project could be compromised as well. We've gained a lot of momentum. Our committee's growing, enthusiasm's growing. I just would like to move forward with it this year if possible.
Any other comments or questions from the floor? Okay, thanks, guys. Oh, Gary, but you need to come to a mic. Just hold on and get to a mic.
One of the things that
Can you just say
1029 Main Street, and I come to this project very much interested in the legacy of General Lincoln and all of the major initiatives that are happening in this town to celebrate that. And I see that, and I'm very intrigued by the cultural district approach. And I'm just thinking, as I was following along the discussion about, there's the issue of parkland or open space. And I'm just thinking, we don't have parkland, as Judy said, in our zoning. But we're also looking at a legacy here where we're trying to set up some interpretive, iconic pieces that will help anchor this legacy as other towns have done. I mean, for example, when you go to Lexington Green, you see the Minuteman. Very important statue because it centers people's approach as to what the beginning of the discussion might be about what happened there. And I see the same thing in the purchase of the Lincoln House. I see the statue in that kind of the same realm, that this kind of anchors the historic district, which celebrates the Lincolns, but also in their contributions to the town, but it also is an artifact that basically makes it a little bit less abstract. And so I'm just thinking in terms of a cultural district, could we, in the next week, could we think about, and in chatting with the CPC, could we, the CPA and the folks in the State House, could we basically ask them, this is what we're talking about a district, and it's more than just one element. There's major significant pieces in this district, and this is a significant piece. Could we do this under an official and open space district? Would that satisfy their kind of criteria in a proactive sense, but also would it allow us to continue to kind of do what we're doing this year? This is a legacy year for the Lincolns, and this is one significant part of it. And I think it's very important in terms of contributing. I'll also just say in closing that as a member of the Hingham Militia, I'm very intrigued by this also because General Lincoln was the one who started the Hingham Militia. And thanks to Alec, who resurrected, in his group who resurrected the militia in '76, we're still there. So I see it as important from our respective position.
May I ask a question? Would the applicant accept money with a condition that the applicant be required before they receive the money getting an affirmative opinion that we can in fact give you that grant?
Absolutely, yes. We would appreciate anything. You know, we want to make this done, and we would appreciate any commitment from the committee. So yes, we would.
With the burden on you to get us the legal opinion, not the burden on us to get the legal opinion.
He doesn't have access to town council as an applicant to the committee. The committee has access to town council. So if town council says, I completely disagree, go forward, this is legit, it's legal, then we have a positive, affirmative
I understand,
opinion.
but sometimes you get opinions of council that are not town council. You get zoning opinions, you get legal opinions. Maybe you get someone connected to the organization in the state that says, no, you can do this. I'm just curious, if we put that condition, would they accept it?
Yes.
If we have trouble getting town council lined up and getting an opinion.
Yeah, absolutely, we would.
Other questions, comments? Okay, thanks, guys. Okay. Next up is Andrea Young from the Historic Commission for both the Canterbury Street Cemetery and the painting of the tree in Park Barn.
Last year, we got an Excel sheet that we could use prior to our vote to kind of...
I'm going to address that tomorrow night.
Great, thank you.
The ask for the cemetery is $40,000, and the ask for the painting of the tree in Park Barn is $45,000. There you go.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much, Deirdre. I am here to talk about the Canterbury Street Cemetery again. And I do have some additional information from last time, and I hope you will indulge me with this. So I just wanted to talk about the status of the cemetery and where we are. I think, and this goes to the fact that, you know, the question is, why not next year? Why not the year after? We have obtained the permission from the two remaining heirs. They do not want to be involved with the cemetery. They're very happy for the town to take that over and much relieved. We have an order of taking that was approved by town meeting, so that this cemetery can be preserved as an historic asset of the town. Also, in October, the Board of Selectmen met to authorize the Historical Commission and the Historical Commission Administrator to oversee the cleanup and historic restoration of the Canterbury Street Cemetery, with further communication with the Board of Selectmen. So I think in terms of having the town behind us, behind this project, it's all here. We also, they've been generous enough to give me a line item for cemetery maintenance, and that's been added to my budget. Selectmen have approved that. I'm going to the advisory committee on the 14th, and so hopefully they will see that as a plus as well. So we're talking about, just to remind you, and the folks at home, the Barnes and Stoddard burial ground, the earliest stone identifiable is 1827. This cemetery contains the graves of 5 adults and 10 children, following 3 generations. Here is just, this is the way it was in 2001. It was easily accessible. The stones were in pretty good shape. And here we are this past April 2019, and the terrain has changed considerably. I'm bringing this up because the consultants who will be helping us with this project have done a similar project to this Dake family burial ground in Greenfield, New York. And this is after it's been cleaned up from, all the fallen logs and everything else. So this is their first day on the job. And there were really only 3 stones standing at that time. Couldn't even see half of them because they had been, they sink into the earth. Whoops. There goes the drama. Wait a second. Wait. Here we go. I'm back. All right, so now, here it is, all restored. And so, thank you, Deirdre. There we go. So you can see there were 3 stones standing when they started, and now there are 37. They were able to find fragments and pieces and put everything back together again. So that's just to show you what is possible that can be done. Benjamin Franklin, I love this. He said, "Show me your cemeteries and I will tell you what kind of people you have." Kind of an interesting thought. I have another one if you want to hear it. This one is kind of long and a little bit ponderous, but it's from William Gladstone. "Show me the manner in which a nation cares for its dead, and I will measure with mathematical exactness the tender mercies of its people, their respect for the laws of the land, and their loyalty to high deeds." So, something to think about. But I really I find this to be an urgent request at this point. The $40,000 includes the cleanup. It includes the cemetery assessment of the gravestones and what needs to be done. And keep in mind that this will all be documented to the fullest extent. And finally, it involves some early work on some of the stones so that we can at least get this standing, some of them standing again. I have to tell you, we go over there and walk through there, and I'm picking up the nips, you know, the little bottles, and the other trash and the beer cans, and so it's obvious that people are stomping around in there, and because there are always new bottles and cans every time I go there. So it's unfortunate because these stones are slate, in contrast to the ones at the Dake Cemetery that I showed you, which are marble because that's what they used in upstate New York. These are slate, and they delaminate, and they are very fragile, and, you know, if you've ever stepped on a piece of slate, you know what happens. And so we've got everything else in place, so I'm hoping that you will fund this project. Thank you.
Questions or comments from the committee?
This would get us started with the stones.
Right.
What does that mean?
That means that I need to apply for funding from other sources in the coming years in order to complete the preservation work at the cemetery.
So will deterioration continue even after this is funded?
Well, they are going to take measures to recover as much as they can. And so, and that really includes digging down and finding these small pieces and shards. They will have everything, keep everything intact to the point that they can until restoration is able to be done. So deteriorating, probably not much more, because they will all be, these pieces will be gathered together and stored.
Other questions?
Obviously, you've heard everyone's concerned about our limited funding. Based on your research, are you saying to this committee that you need to do this now because the stones are sinking and disappearing, and that you may not be able to recover them if we were to ask you to wait a year for the next round of funding?
Of course, some things will be able to be recovered, but given the conditions there and how overgrown it is, and the fact that there is evidence that people are tramping around in there, it stands to reason that some of these things are going to be lost even, or deteriorate even further. So that's my urgency, Kevin.
Your project, sorry for jumping in, but your project does not include any fencing?
No, however.
Or a proposal that the town ban the sale of nips?
Oh, God. No, my hope is that once it's cleaned up and it is, people can see what it is, that the respect for that piece of property will return. Now, we will get the stone wall restored, and there is a possibility that my intent is either to get the fence that was there, which was a split rail, donated, or we may possibly be able to get some stones from work sites to be able to make a small fence, stone wall, pardon me.
Keith German, 104 Kilby Street. I'd like to read from two state statutes and make some comments as well. I'm speaking not as the Director of Veteran Services because after a vetted process, there are no veterans buried there, but I physically feel like I'm speaking as an abutter. I live in the neighborhood, and this is of great concern to me. So under Chapter 114 of Mass General Law, Section 18, any town having within its limits an abandoned or neglected burial ground may take charge of same. We did this, April town meeting. And keep it in good order, hence the asking price, $40,000. It may appropriate money therefore, but not property rights shall be violated, and no body shall be disinterred. No fence, tomb, monument, or other structure shall be removed or destroyed, but the same may be repaired or restored. So we have taken on this burden. Why did we take that on? I'm going to try to talk as plainly as possible. After having served over 25 years in the U.S. Navy, the rules and regulations we have are because somebody screwed up. That's why we have those rules. I look at the Commonwealth being just as old as the U.S. Navy, okay, literally, and they have these rules for a reason. Someone else has walked away from a burial ground. It's incumbent upon us as citizens. It's not so much, I know Kevin keeps speaking about the money. I understand it's limited funds, but sometimes we have to transcend that money. This is a moral issue. This is where you folks need to dig down deep and go, is this the right thing to do? Do I know Barnes? Not personally. I've heard of Barnes Wharf. Do I know Stoddards? Well, I don't know. There's a Stoddards Neck. I mean, these were people of prominence in the day. For us to overlook this at this time is really would be unconscionable, I think. This is a moral dilemma. And it was a hard fight at town meeting. This wasn't a slam dunk by any means. And I think the next section, which is Section 16, which I think this is where you might have been going, Judy. Any town may annually appropriate and raise by taxation such sums as may be necessary to care for and keep in good order and to protect by proper fencing any or all burial grounds within the town in which 10 or more, we clearly heard this 15, are interred and are not properly cared for by the owners. The owners have walked away. And the care and protection of such burial grounds shall be in charge of the cemetery commissioners. Hence, if there is no such officer in the town, will otherwise be taken charge by the Board of Selectmen. These are old laws. Again, they're here for a reason, and I feel very strongly, and I think many members of the committee, many members of the town that night had very mixed opinions on it. Why are we getting into this? And my answer, as I heard you say, Mr. Chairman, you looked at your committee member in a different light, you were saying the same things, but you agreed to disagree, is we need to look past that money value and say, are we doing the right thing? It's we that are here now. I believe 100% of the slide that she showed at first, it was a wooded area, there were a couple of graves. Kids are probably cutting through there, no problem. The last slide that she showed was really a full cemetery. You're probably more not apt to go in there. That respect has risen, it's come back, and we may find things in there that are of great historical value, but maybe not. But I think we need to transcend that and look past that and say, morally, should we not be doing this? That's all I have, sir.
Thanks, Pete. I appreciate everything you said, and I've got to tell you, unfortunately, kids go through cemeteries. It happens, but your points are well taken. Gary, you want to come to the mic?
Before Gary speaks, Mr. Urban, could you just give me the statutory site references that you had, please? I just want to get the statutory sites.
Come on up, Gary.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I just want, I can
That is 16.
Okay.
That I wrote on this.
114.
We're going to move to Gary. Can you guys take it offline after the meeting? Okay.
Gary Tondorf, Dick, 1029 Main Street. I just wanted to offer some comments relative to stewardship of our older cemeteries in the town. And there are people, a number of folks in the town who have stepped up, and I really want to celebrate Andrea's commitment to be the person who's the steward here to basically bring this in front of to the fore, so that both in terms of town meeting, but also now in terms of implementing this. And the perspective that I want to share on this is that I'm the chair of the Liberty Plain Cemetery Association, and we are a small nonprofit cemetery, of which all the cemeteries in the town are, except for 2. And when I first moved into my house in South Hingham in 1986, I happened to notice this cemetery that was in really terrible condition and did not know what was happening with it. In the traditional world, cemeteries are taken care of by the municipalities or by the diocese or what have you. And so we came into a cemetery and we realized that we had to reverse the decline. And I think that's what Andrea is proposing here, is that when I look at the slide that shows the Stoddard stone, the slate stone, I don't know if you could take another look at that. These are slate stones. This is a sedimentary material. It's a very high quality stone. It maintains an etching, the line work and the lettering and what have you over time. But when you look at a stone like that, half the stone's above the ground, half the stone's below the ground. And these stones are subject to the stress of climate and weather and freeze-thaw. And what's happened to this cemetery is that 15, 20, 30 years ago, more of these stones were vertical. As they get tipped over, because we learned with Liberty Plain, is that when someone knows that there's a caretaker present, the kind of behavior that you don't ever expect to happen in a dignified place like a cemetery stops. We found that we didn't have the trespassing, we didn't have the loitering, we didn't have the beer cans. And when people realize that someone has taken an active role here to be the caretaker and to reverse this decline, I think that's what's key here. And that's why I think that we can't wait, because what happens is that it's incremental, but it starts to accelerate. Once these stones become horizontal, then they crack, and then they sink. So and we found this in Liberty Plain. We have stones that are 1 foot, 2 feet below grade. Once we were doing the research, we located where the stone should be, and we had the proper preservation methodologies in place. We found things that we were really surprised that were there. And it just seems to me that in this project this year, the way I understand this is they will reverse the decline, and they'll redirect the cemetery on a path where it can come back. And it's going to take some time. This is a lifelong kind of a stewardship, but you can't just do it at once. Once this is reversed, then other people will come and help. What we found with Liberty Plain is that people in this town are very generous. We don't have the money to do a stone driveway, and we're having a problem with some of the vehicles coming in, bottoming out. We had folks in the town, once they knew we had a need, they responded. They said, well, you're taking care of this, we'll help you. I think we can get this going here. This is the beginning, and I think it's a commitment, it's an investment well spent. And so I know that there are constraints on the available funds and what have you, but I just wanted to put this into the context of this kind of stewardship, and I don't think they can wait on the cemetery. I've walked through it in detail and looked at everything and looked at all the information, and based on what I know about my experience in 30-something years at Liberty Plain, I think this is time. I think she needs it this year, or the cemetery does. Great, thank you.
Thanks for your comments, Gary.
Thank you, Karen.
Anybody else? Okay, Andrea, Act 2, painting of the tree and park barn.
Yes, and you'll be relieved to know that I don't have anything to add. The tree and park barn is, again, it's an iconic structure in town. It's one of the most beautiful buildings that we have. And right now, it is in desperate need of a new envelope. It needs to be painted. And I think those of you who went on the site visit were able to see that it's seriously deteriorating in terms of the window surrounds, a lot of the clapboard, the rakes and everything else. There are just pieces that are now sitting, which Dick Orr, the gentleman who leases the building, was able to recover that fell off the ground or fell onto the ground, and now he's got them. But they need to be put back up, and they need to be painted. So anyway, I don't have anything more to add, except that I know we had the discussion about why isn't the town maintaining this building? But they have put in a new boiler, and there have been some other improvements to this. The windows, as you know, thanks to the committee's generosity, the windows were able to be restored, and they're absolutely beautiful. And so it would be a shame, because of the current condition, that there would be water seeping in, and it's just not, the envelope is just not intact. So, anyway, there we have it.
Questions or comments? Anyone?
I have a question. So, looking at it, I completely agree. It is in rough shape. However, my question is, when was the last, I can't remember, when was the last time it was fully painted?
That was, I think, about 7 years ago, 7 or 8 years ago. Yeah, 2013. And it was it was an unfortunate job. It was a terrible job. And so it started peeling almost immediately. I don't think it was properly prepared for the paint.
Has any painting, maintenance, care been done to the outside of the house since that point in time?
No.
So it was never, any of the spots that were peeling, the town did not go in and maintain?
Not that I'm aware of. No, I don't think so. Don't forget, Kirsten, it was a number of years to get it to this point.
Oh, yes.
Anyone else from the floor? Okay, we're going to do this again tomorrow night with 5 other applicants. In the meantime, would anybody like to make a motion to adjourn? Okay, seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you all. See you tomorrow.